Welcome to this event in the Reading Festival for Climate, and we're delighted to have Steve Kenzie to talk to us about the UN Sustainable Development Goals. He is on the board of the UN Global Compact, which, as he was saying just now, is a small part of the UN, but it's the part of the UN that reaches out to business. And so it's very important that the UN Global Compact is interpreting the UN Sustainable Development Goals as something that are appropriate for organizations of all sorts to implement. Steve has already spoken in a webinar that we held at Ethical Reading, so I know he's a really super speaker. He's a Canadian from British Columbia, but as he says, he has been spending the last 17 years here trying to change his accent. He's perfectly comprehensible though. And so I'll hand over to Steve. I think he's planning to talk for about half an hour so that we can have a vibrant Q&A session after that.
Thanks very much.
Over to you, Steve.
Thanks very much, Jill, and thanks everyone for coming along. As Jill noted, my plan is to talk for about 30 minutes. I'm going to very briefly tell you a little bit more about the UN Global Compact, and then I would like to tell you about the Sustainable Development Goals, what they are, why you should care about them, and what you can do to contribute to achieving them. And I hope by the end of that, it will be clear why we would have thought it was appropriate to be talking about the Sustainable Development Goals during a climate festival. And I think that's key, and I'll try to circle back to that as we go along. So Global Compact is mobilizing a global movement of sustainable companies and stakeholders to create the world we want. That world we want turn of phrase will come up again in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals. It's the 20th anniversary of Global Compact, launched by Kofi Annan at the Millennium, with just 40 companies signing up to a compact between the UN and the business world. And it's resonated since then. We've now grown to 12,000 companies participating globally, and another 3,500 non-business organizations, participants across 160 countries and 69 local networks. And my role is to manage the UK network. And we have over 500 organizations in the UK that have signed up to the Global Compact and are engaging with us. Now, the very essence of the Global Compact, what the Compact is built around 10 universal principles that have been drawn from UN treaties in the areas of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. This gives us what we feel is a rock-solid foundation wherever your business may operate. The Global Compact will be relevant there. And this was the idea when it was introduced. Globalization was leading to problems, companies outsourcing some of their environmental and labor challenges into less rigorously enforced legal regimes, and we're seeing labor standards and labor standards falling, human rights abuses going unaddressed, environmental standards ignored, corruption rampant. And our view was that there really are universal standards, and we needed companies to publicly stand up for those. And the Global Compact was a way of expressing that in a clear code. To join the Global Compact is a CEO commitment. The CEO needs to send a letter to the Secretary General making 3 promises. Firstly, to operationalize our 10 principles throughout the business. Secondly, to report annually on progress. So the degree of transparency, and this is a key integrity measure for us that companies need to show that they're doing something. And the third piece is to support the wider UN development agenda. And that's what gets me a speaking slot in a function like this, is to talk to you about the Sustainable Development Goals, because that really is the very definition of the UN's wider agenda at the moment. So what are the SDGs? I'm going to go back, uh, could go back even further, Silent Spring and Rachel Carson to the 60s and the beginning of the environmental movement. But I'm going to start in 1987 when the UN convened um, uh, the World Commission on Development, and it laid the groundwork for much of the work that came behind. And the publication that emerged from that conference was Our Common Future. Um, the chair of that commission was Gro Brundtland, the former prime minister of Norway, and she defined sustainable development with an elegant definition that remains um, applicable today. Development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Pretty straightforward stuff. But we're seeing it, paraphrased in the Welsh Future Generations Act as an example. It seems pretty obvious that we can't burn the candle at both ends, and we need to live within our means now so as not to place a burden on future generations. This set in motion the convening of the 1992 Earth Summit and Agenda 21 and the Rio Declaration that came out of that, a Commission on Sustainable Development, and ultimately the Millennium Development Goals that launched in 2000. 8 goals, 16 more specific targets beneath them, announced in 2000, meant to be achieved by 2015. And they weren't achieved, but they demonstrated that by creating these global goals, we could mobilize resources to address these huge challenges in ways that had not been thought possible before. And so while we didn't achieve the goals in full, we did clearly define a new direction and ways of working in the sustainable development space that led and around, well, in fact, it was 2012 at the Rio Plus 20 summit where the decision was taken that there needed to be a post 2015 agenda, a sustainable development agenda. And so the strap line out of Rio Plus 20 was the future we want. And born there was Agenda 2030. And within Agenda 2030 are the Sustainable Development Goals. And here they are. 17 goals. Beneath the goals, 169 more specific targets, and then 232 indicators to measure progress on the goals. The Millennium Development Goals applied only to developing countries. The Sustainable Development Goals apply to every country in the world. It's a broader agenda, although it encapsulates the essence of the MDGs as well. The goals are tremendously interconnected, which we'll come back to. Key theme running through them is no one left behind. This is the idea. Is it not just about we need to get to the least developed countries, and within developed countries, we need to get to the most overlooked constituencies and make sure that everyone is benefiting from the prosperity and the benefits to all that achieving these goals would bring about. While governments made this commitment, it's really important to recognize that these goals cannot be achieved by governments alone. And there's a really critical role for business to play. But I think every citizen has a role to play in helping to incentivize both business and government to take this agenda seriously and make some progress on it. Now, this is all that most people ever see of the goals, and I'd like to just go quickly a little bit deeper so you're exposed to the targets, because that's really where the rubber hits the road. So when you see that icon for zero hunger, I think for many it could give an impression that that's less relevant to us here in in a wealthy country like the UK. The full text of the goal is to end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. So it's actually a much wider agenda than simply eliminating hunger. And when we get down to the level of the targets, you can see that 2.1 is certainly aligned with the icon, but 2.2 is to end all forms of malnutrition. And so now we're talking a much bigger agenda, in fact, and we're addressing some of the problems that plague the UK and Reading, problems of not just not having enough food, but obesity and the quality of food and knowledge of food and food waste. 2.3, doubling agricultural productivity. It's obviously really important to become more efficient, but the second piece to improve the incomes of small scale farmers introduces a cultural element that I think is also important. The family farm is an important cultural icon in every country, and the goals seek to protect that. Sustainable food systems and improved resilience in agricultural practices, very strong link there now to the climate change agenda. Maintaining the genetic diversity of seeds, plants, and animals, probably the least expected of these targets when you simply start from a position of zero hunger. But again, clear to see that if we're taking a holistic long-term view of the future we want, that's a critical component of it. And again, a really important link to climate change if we believe that we are currently in the middle of a mass extinction event. When the targets switch to letters from numbers, it's more about process, and they address some of the things that need to change in the way we operate in order to bring about these goals, increasing investments, correcting and preventing trade restrictions and distortions, and ensuring the proper functioning of food commodity markets. Another one to look at just quickly, good health and well-being, the full text to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. Now, maternal mortality and infant health, ending the epidemics of AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. These are all things that were carried forward from the Millennium Development Goals, but adding in now non-communicable diseases, which is heart disease and so on, which are becoming ever-growing problems, not just in wealthy countries, but around the world. Substance abuse is a plague, again, that's affecting all the world. Road traffic accidents, perhaps not something you'd obviously think of around good health and well-being, but it's a leading cause of death for young people all around the world, and something that we need to address. Sexual and reproductive health, achieving universal health coverage. These are all essential to achieving good health and well-being around the world. It's as I wanted to say, make clear, it is a holistic agenda to bring about the world we want. And of course, I mentioned the interconnections between the goals, and you can see clearly, I think, as you look through here, linkages to Goal 5, for example, on achieving gender equality, or Goal 10 on achieving equality between and within countries. There are also components here that link into sustainable cities, Goal 11, life on land, Goal 14, and of course, Goal 13, climate change, which I'm going to touch on now. This was one that was slightly controversial. It earned an asterisk in the goal, so taking urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. The Sustainable Development Goals were passed by the UN General Assembly in September of 2015. The Paris Accord was adopted a few months later. It was recognized that this agenda needed to acknowledge the importance of climate change without undermining the existing structures to advance that agenda. And so it comes through sort of loud and clear in the goals that we recognize the importance of climate change and how it impacts the whole agenda. But it's the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change that is the primary international forum for addressing this. And so there was no Paris Accord to refer to, but if there had been, it would certainly be in there. And I think it's really key that the points that are raised here about resilience and adaptive capacity, integrating climate change into national policies, and improving education around climate change are really important goals that are reflected in the Paris Accords. Okay. Wishing now that I'd left that image of all the goals here. But just to circle back, I suppose, issues like the goal number 1, zero, eliminating poverty. Poverty is made worse by climate change, and also poverty makes climate change worse. It changes behaviors of people. They drive vehicles that are more polluting. They engage in activities that are more polluting. The same is true with goal 2 around zero hunger. Climate change is going to make it harder to feed the world, but also unsustainable agriculture exacerbates climate change. We could go through all 17 goals. Sustainable cities are going to be much harder to be sustainable in a warmer world. And at the same time, if we don't make our cities more sustainable, we're exacerbating the problem. So I suppose I've just answered why you should care. This slide is meant to highlight one reason you should care is because lots of other people care. And whether you address the goals yourself or not, other people are. And you're going to be caught up in this massive wave. You'll notice the Prime Minister's lapel, the pin there is the Sustainable Development Goals logo. If you could be forgiven for thinking that the government in the UK was unaware of this agenda, but I assure you they are aware. It is already influencing policy, and we can expect this agenda to continue to do so going forward. And so that means it's going to influence us as individuals, as taxpayers, and as employees and business owners. It's a very important agenda to be familiar with. Mark Carney's headline, he's saying corporations told to draw up climate rules or have them imposed. He's referring to the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which is at the moment a voluntary initiative that just has recommendations for how companies report on their exposure to climate risk. But if companies don't take the hint, they should expect regulation to come in. Uber stripped of its London license due to a lack of corporate responsibility. This is the SDGs, in essence, a company not taking a wider view of their role in society and thinking that they could take this agenda and put it in a box with a non-financial label on it and think it was less important until it became very financial and most important. And I think that's a really important lesson for all businesses to recognize that they ignore this agenda at their peril. Those are Amazon employees. They're not, it's not Greenpeace or Extinction Rebellion picketing Amazon. It's their own employees saying they want to work for a company that's taking its responsibilities as a corporate citizen more seriously. And they were out there picketing to change that behavior. The next image is Extinction Rebellion, and it's the people taking to the streets demanding change. And effectively what they're asking for is the adoption and more rapid progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. And the last slide, the Norway Wealth Fund bans investments in G4S over fears of human rights violations. So just one last important stakeholder group that are acting in alignment with the SDGs, and there's more of that to come. Investors are getting ever more tuned into the risks posed to their investments by companies ignoring this important agenda. We're talking about a transformation in society as we know it, and any time there's change like that, there will be winners and losers. The Business and Sustainable Development Commission found the winners are going to win big in this. They identified $12 trillion worth of new business value a year in the transformation that the goals are calling for. And that was only in three key sectors. The, the money to be made from this is enormous as we change everything from the transformation of the energy system uh, to to green power, the transformation of transportation system to green vehicles, the transformation of the food system away from meat to more sustainable ways of feeding ourselves. There are tremendous business opportunities in this. It's a very business-friendly agenda. At a macro level, a better educated and more productive workforce is good for business. Economic and political stability, more fair and just societies, climate resilience, these are all pro-business objectives. At a micro level, it makes a business more attractive for investors and customers if they are demonstrably addressing the concerns raised by the Sustainable Development Goals. It improves management of supply chains, access to public procurement and public investment, possibly the most direct line between the Sustainable Development Goals and the bottom line is through competitiveness in hiring. The best and the brightest young people want to work for companies that have a purpose beyond just making rich people richer. They want to have a positive impact on the world through the work that they do every day. And it's absolutely documented empirical evidence that companies that can show their linkage to the SDGs and to a higher purpose have an advantage at hiring the best and the brightest. And it's clear how that's going to translate into a competitive advantage in business. The social license to operate, I suppose that's it's linked, but we're going to continue to see more and more of that. Just an expectation on the part of consumers and regulators and investors and employees that companies are just gonna, this is just gonna be the baseline. It's expected now. Okay. I should have mentioned, yeah, as Jill did, there's Q&A at the end, so I'm not really pausing for breath, but we'll have time at the end. So if you do have questions, I don't know if there's a chat box. I think there is. So by all means, feel free to type something in there, or we're not such a big group, so maybe we'll just open up the mic later. I'll leave that to you, Jill. How can you contribute to the SDGs? If you don't recognize him, that's the Secretary General. And he's basically saying, well, he is saying it's abundantly clear we need a deeper, faster, and more ambitious response to unleash the social and economic transformation that we need to achieve this agenda. We certainly need it more from our government. We need it more from business. And I think the impetus, therefore, has to come from citizens. We did a little something earlier this year to try and do our part. We organized a letter to the Prime Minister. We had 150 signatories, CEOs and other high-profile individuals calling on the government to ensure that their recovery strategy from COVID-19 was aligned with the SDGs. We did get a polite response from one of the Prime Minister's cabinet members, but we really haven't seen the kind of action and public statements in this space that we would have liked to see. In a climate forum, I suppose, we can celebrate the Prime Minister's commitment to net zero by 2050 and to increasing our investment in wind power. But I think this is a really important point that needs to come out in any climate forum. We can't address climate change in isolation. It needs to be part of a bigger, more holistic agenda. And I think that agenda has to be the SDGs. It's the right way forward. Okay. Looking at business, 81% of companies in a survey of UN Global Compact participants reported on taking action in support of the goals. but only 39% of them have targets that they believe themselves are sufficiently ambitious or are based in science or aligned with societal needs. So that's right away a disappointing gap in the ambition we need. The last bullet, only 15% of the survey respondents have set science-based targets. The Science-Based Targets Initiative is a project that moves companies' commitments in the area of climate change and emissions reductions. It moves those commitments away from the marketing department and into the realm of science. There are very robust methodologies out there to define what is an acceptable level of emissions for any company if we are going to achieve the Paris Accords and keep global warming below 1.5 degrees. We need every company to align their emissions reduction targets with science. It's simply not enough to pluck numbers out of the air. And if you're not aligning with science, then what are you doing? It's not sufficient to leave this in the hands of the marketing department. It needs to be more robust than that. And so this is an area where the UN Global Compact is doing a lot of work. We want to move goal setting from incremental goals to absolute goals, from output oriented to impact oriented, moving away from philanthropy into core business, changing the way we do business to be less harmful to the climate, and moving away from KPIs that are just internally focused to interconnected systems. And this is where science-based targets means your emissions are recognized as having an impact on others. And the Science-Based Targets Initiative takes a close look at scope 3 emissions. And I hope I don't want to go too far into that, but in the lexicon of climate change, scope 1 emissions are your own. It's that coal that you're burning in your furnace. Scope 2 are the emissions your energy provider, the coal that they're burning in their furnace to provide you with energy. And scope 3 is somewhat everything else, and it's a big basket, and it would be the emissions from the flight that you took, or if you manufacture shampoo, it's the emissions from the hot water that your customer is using to shampoo their hair with. Or if you're an automobile, well, if you're an automobile company, the petrol being burned, and that's all wrapped up into those science-based targets. If you have low emissions yourself directly, but you're producing a product that causes massive emissions, the science-based targets will capture that and hold you account for it. So we're developing a set of absolute benchmarks aimed at galvanizing business ambition around the SDGs. We've got a lot of partners involved in it. I don't want to just read out the whole slide, but I think the key questions are: where can companies have the greatest impact through their core business? And then, is there a sufficiently mature metric that would allow us to set an absolute target where we could basically say to companies, you need to do this. You've got 10 years till 2030. This is a sustainable development goal that we expect every company to achieve. And this is where we're at now. 100% of employees across the organization should be earning a living wage. We should stop pretending that the legal minimum wages in countries around the world are anything more than a random number. And it's time that there be some rigor behind minimum wages, and that they be living wages, that minimum wages align with the cost of living in a country, and that employees can't be exploited and be working full time and still not be able to live a decent life. There should be gender balance across all levels of management in a company. At the moment, we see companies setting targets of 30% women on boards. It's 50% of the population. And any target really less than 50% should be raising eyebrows. We're talking now by 2030. Frankly, with 10 years to change, we need companies to get pipelines in place to move female and ethnic minority talent up into positions of seniority in their organizations. We need to get working on this now, and if we do, there's no excuse for not achieving it by 2030. And that's something we feel is totally positive. Net positive water impact in water stressed basins. If you're in a water rich area, there aren't many of those left, but where they are, that's fine. But if you're in a water stressed area, it's not an unreasonable expectation that business operations there would be water, if not net positive. Well, we're saying net positive, and I think let's have it. Zero waste to landfill, zero discharge of hazardous pollutants, 100% sustainable material inputs. So this is circular economy, science-based emissions targets, and so on and so on. These are absolute targets that we feel are within the realm of every company to achieve by 2030, and we are going to start campaigning for that. Already lots of materials available out there. I'm not sure how we're going to make these slides available, Jill, if we are, but if this material is all available on the UN Global Compact website, if you're interested in more about SDG ambition. The SDG Compass is a really useful tool that is available to all at sdgcompass.org. Here, we've got some links to some webinars that we did previously on each of the steps in the compass that you might find of interest. In the UK, as part of the Sustainable Development Goals, countries are invited every year to attend the high-level political forum in July, where they can make a voluntary national review and present to other countries around the world the progress that they're making towards achieving the goals. The UK government presented in 2019, and you can find a link to that review on this slide. If you want more up-to-date information, the UK Office for National Statistics is world leading in their performance on measuring the progress towards the goals. They have an excellent website that's a valuable resource in this area. Another great resource, a little older, Measuring Up, was produced in 2018, but it provides a really useful baseline and an interesting contrast to the voluntary national review that was put out by the government. Measuring Up was produced by UK Stakeholders for Sustainable Development. It was a multi-stakeholder project to create a baseline for progress on the goals, and it's a very good read. At the local level, well, we might as well put some pressure on Reading. I don't know if we have anybody from the local council tuned in, but the Local Governments Association has produced a guide for councils on the SDGs that I would urge anyone from local government here to have a look at that. I would urge you all to make sure that that your representatives are aware that this document exists, and then maybe put the squeeze on. Bristol have produced a voluntary local review of progress on the goals, a city level review of how they're doing towards achieving the goals. Newcastle have done the same. Liverpool are in the process of producing one. I would posit that this would be a not unreasonable expectation for the citizens of Reading to ask their local council to consider producing such a document and demonstrating how they are aligning policy and practice with this important agenda. maybe a bit cheeky, and I apologize to the organizers. If you want to know more about, we've got some stuff coming up that might be of interest to this audience. So I thought I'd just take this opportunity. On Monday, we just missed getting it linked into this event. We're doing an event on climate change and SMEs, and particularly around science-based targets. We're doing it in partnership with the Netherlands Global Compact Network, but it might be of interest to anyone on this call who is works in an SME and interested in how you might engage around the climate agenda. There's a link at the very bottom, but you can also find a link to this on the UK network page. And we're having our own Global Compact Network UK Climate Forum next week. We've got a number of events lined up looking at some of the key issue areas impacting business around climate change, and they're all open to the public, and everybody that's interested is most welcome to attend. Went a little longer than I thought I would, so apologies, Jill and Rob and everyone else.